A few days before the Crawford-Madrimov fight, I made this video where I stated my opinion that Crawford-Madrimov should not be the main event. Now, this opinion wasn't based on any lack of accomplishments with Terence Crawford. For me, he's top 3 pound for pound easy. No, my opinion was based on the realities of business. And having heard the crowd boo Terence Crawford throughout the fight, it's only strengthened my opinion. A lot of people also left the stadium during the fight. Now, for people who say they don't care about the business aspect of boxing, well, you really need to care, because we're only going to continue getting the fights that we want to see if they're commercially viable, if the organizers of the fights, and that includes the Saudis, can make money off them. Because if they can't, then these types of fights and these types of events are going to disappear. Anybody who thinks that the Saudis do not care whatsoever about making a profit from these shows is very badly mistaken. Yes, they are trying to use sport, including boxing, to rebrand their country, but that's only part of why they're doing it. They do ultimately want to make a profit and at the very least recoup some costs. Hence, the tickets for this event were very expensive, and they charged a pay-per-view premium on DAZN in multiple countries around the world, which is not typical of DAZN pay-per-views in the past, where they would charge pay-per-view in maybe 1, 2, or possibly 3 countries at the most. In the rest of the world, it will be part of the DAZN subscription costs. So the Saudis are trying to recoup money on these shows like crazy. And so the reason I said that Crawford-Madrimov should not have been top of the bill is because you're putting on a show in LA, which has a large Mexican population. You've got a number of Mexican fighters on the card, and somehow you've got an African American against an Uzbek topping the bill. That simply doesn't make any sense. Yes, the African American, in this case, Terence Crawford, is very talented, again, top 3 pound for pound, but he's not a massive star. And he certainly wasn't particularly popular with the overwhelmingly Mexican crowd. They came to see Pitbull versus Rayo, some of them Andy Ruiz, and there were also a number of people who came purely to watch Eminem perform. When those things were done and the main event was on, you heard boos and you saw people leaving. In business, you give the customer what they want. Simple as that. If you're going to have Crawford topping the bill, you match him against the Mexican, if not at least the Latino of some other nationality, right? If not, you put Crawford lower down the bill and you have Pitbull Cruz headlining, or Andy Ruiz, or you push the show back and you revive that matchup between Virgil Ortiz and Tim Tszyu and put that top of the bill. That's what you do in LA. If you do that, everybody stays for the main event. Nobody leaves beforehand. The Mexican crowd evidently were not fans of Terence Crawford, and they didn't know who Madrimov was. In promoting the fight, Crawford and Madrimov were the biggest figures on the poster. Their names were the biggest. So when casual fans, and yes, boxing needs casual fans, folks. We often have to educate casual fans, but at the end of the day, the big fights happened because of them. When the casual fans were seeing the fight poster for this show, they were looking at Crawford-Madrimov in passing, right? It needed to have a Mexican main event with the names of 2 Mexicans written large on the poster. And so moving forward, I think the Saudis, if they're going to continue to do shows in the United States, need to take these things into account. They need to understand the ethnic dynamics of boxing in the United States. In the UK, it's a little different. It's not so split down ethnic lines. There's a little bit of that, but it's not so black and white as it is in the United States, where you really need to factor it into the way you're going to market an event. Not saying you need to be baiting anyone, but you need to be catering to the demographics of a particular city. Mexicans, as we know, really come out in force to support their guys. When I see a show anywhere in the world, be it in LA, New York, Australia, China, the UK, wherever, I want to see it well attended. I want to see as many people there as possible, because the more satisfied boxing fans there are, the more buzz it creates, and the more willing boxing fans will become to spend money on events and shows, particularly if you're trying to publicize yourself as a new entity in the boxing world, as the Saudis are with Riyadh season. Now, in Saudi Arabia itself, the events aren't going to be necessarily attended as well as events in the UK, right? Because the Saudis do not have much of a history of professional boxing in their country. So there isn't an indigenous fan base for it there at the moment. That's going to take time to cultivate and develop. But when they do their foreign shows, they need to be sellouts. They've got the budget to put everything in place to make sure that they are sellouts. They just need to get their strategy right. Another thing which I don't think goes down well with Western boxing fans is the way in which Turki Al-Sheikh was presented to the audience. You see, in the Arab world, at least in the Gulf states, the royal family and the government, which are virtually the same thing. I mean, the high positions in government are populated mainly by members of the royal family, members of the nobility, for lack of a better term, and their friends. That's what the senior positions in these Gulf states in government are populated by. And if you've ever been over there or lived in the Gulf before, you'll know that these people, these royals and nobles, are deified almost. Not quite elevated to the level of deities, but not far off. You got murals of them all over the place when you're driving down the highways, posters here, posters there, statues of them all over the place, right in your face. You go to the homes of many of the locals, they got their pictures on the wall of the various royals and what have you. And so the government, royalty, nobility, and so on in these Gulf countries are used to sycophants. That's what they expect. That's the norm to them. So when you see that kind of thing in the Gulf states, to the local population there, that's normal. It isn't weird or anything. But when you're trying to get Western audiences to look at an individual, in this case in Turki Al-Sheikh, I don't know whether he's actually a royal or not. I mean, the Saudi royal family has got something like 15,000 members. So it's possible he is, or maybe he's just nobility or whatever the case may be. In any event, when they present him the way that they did at this show, inducting him into the Hall of Fame when he's only been in boxing, less than a year, constantly praising him and all this kind of thing, that stuff is normal in the Gulf, in the Middle East. It comes across as very unusual and weird to Western audiences. So if they want to really sell these events to Western audiences, I think they need to tone it down a little bit. I get that that's their culture and that's what they do in their part of the world, but I think Western audiences are really bemused by that kind of stuff. They think it's over the top. I think if you do tone it down, the Western audiences will be happier. I understand that the Saudis are trying to promote Riyadh season, they're trying to promote their country. I get it. But I think they could use these shows to do it in a more effective way, a way which is more palatable to Western audiences. But as I said earlier on, my main point is that moving forward, the Saudis need to be more cognizant of the ethnic dynamics of the boxing audience in the United States and adjust their strategy and adjust their cards, or at least the running order of the fights on their cards accordingly. Now, as for the Crawford-Madrimov fight itself, the controversy about the scoring and so on, I'm going to cover that in a separate video. I'm going to watch the fight back again right after I finish recording this so I can score it round by round, and then I'll make a separate video about it. I often see very impatient individuals wondering why I haven't done this post-fight video and that post-fight video. Believe it or not, I do actually have a life. I wish I had more time, but I've got a business to run with YouTube and Patreon on top of everything else I do. So just bear with me, all right? And before I go, I just want to tell you about this week's exclusive boxing content. I've just uploaded this hour-long, in-depth film study of the Jared Anderson-Martin Bakole fight to my Patreon page, where I analyze the actual video footage and point out the mistakes that both guys made, as well as the things they did right, and ultimately the specific defensive errors which led to Anderson's defeat. If you want to access this video, along with hundreds of hours worth of other exclusive boxing content, as well as our members chat, just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called the Boxing Brotherhood. There's no contract, no commitment. You can cancel at any time, just like Netflix, but it's a hell of a lot cheaper. Just download the app from the Play Store or the App Store. All the links are in the description box below.